Bob Weir was never just a musician. To millions, he was a living symbol of freedom, rebellion, and the strange magic of the Grateful Dead. His voice carried the echo of long American highways, late-night jam sessions, and a generation searching for meaning beyond money and rules. But behind the music, behind the sold-out stadiums and endless tours, there was a quieter story unfolding, one filled with complicated relationships, emotional distance, and a fortune that would eventually leave his family grappling with grief in ways no one expected. For decades, Bob Weir lived a life that most people could only dream of. Fame came early, money followed, and the Grateful Dead became not just a band, but a movement. Yet the irony of Bob Weir's life is that the very freedom he preached often came at a personal cost. While fans saw him as a spiritual guide of rock culture, his family sometimes saw a man who was physically present but emotionally elsewhere, always chasing the next tour, the next sound, the next moment of transcendence. As the years passed, Bob Weir's wealth quietly grew. Unlike many rock stars who burned through their money, Bob was surprisingly careful. The Dead's business structure was revolutionary, allowing band members to retain control over their music, merchandise, and touring revenue. This meant that long after the band's peak, the money kept flowing. Royalties from albums, live recordings, licensing deals, documentaries, and reunion tours built a fortune that few truly understood the size of. By the time Bob Weir entered his later years, his net worth had climbed into the tens of millions. But money, as his family would later learn, does not always bring clarity. Instead, it often magnifies unresolved tensions. Decisions about trusts, inheritance, and legacy became deeply emotional topics, not because of greed, but because of what the money symbolized: love, recognition, and sometimes regret. Bob's personal life was far from simple. His marriage to Natasha Munter, a woman decades younger than him, raised eyebrows, but also reflected Bob's lifelong resistance to convention. Together, they had children, and Bob often spoke publicly about how fatherhood later in life changed him. Yet, even as he tried to be more present, decades of absence had already shaped family dynamics in irreversible ways. As Bob aged, concerns about health began to surface. Though he remained active on stage, those close to him noticed changes, slower movements, moments of reflection that hinted at a man looking back on his life. Behind closed doors, conversations about estate planning grew more serious. Lawyers, financial advisors, and legal documents entered the picture, quietly shaping what would happen when Bob was no longer around. This is where the pain truly began. Bob Weir's fortune was not simply a pile of money waiting to be divided. It was tied up in complex agreements, intellectual property rights, band partnerships, and long-term trusts. Some assets were shared, others were individually owned, and many were emotionally charged. To Bob, these arrangements made sense. To his family, they often felt confusing, distant, and cold. When discussions about inheritance surfaced, emotions ran high. Family members reportedly struggled not with the amount of money, but with the feeling of being shut out of decisions. For children especially, inheritance is rarely just financial. It is symbolic. It represents acknowledgement, love, and validation. Any perceived imbalance can reopen old wounds, making grief heavier than it needs to be. Friends close to the family described moments where conversations turned painful, not because Bob lacked love, but because he expressed it differently. His philosophy of freedom, independence, and non-attachment clashed with the emotional needs of those closest to him. What Bob saw as practical planning, others saw as emotional distance. As news of Bob Weir's fortune circulated, fans reacted with shock. Many believed he lived modestly, almost monk-like, devoted only to music. The reality was more nuanced. Bob lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. The fortune wasn't flashy, it was powerful, quiet, and deeply tied to his legacy, and that made it harder for his family to separate the man they loved from the symbol he had become. When Bob Weir's later years came under public scrutiny, speculation intensified. Headlines focused on numbers, estates, and legal structures, but they missed the real story, the emotional weight carried by a family trying to understand a man who belonged to the world more than he ever belonged to them. For Bob's children, growing up in the shadow of an icon was both a gift and a burden. They inherited not just wealth, but expectations. People assumed privilege meant happiness. In reality, it often meant living with unanswered questions. Did Bob choose music over family, or was music the only way he knew how to survive? Those closest to Bob have hinted that he carried guilt, quiet, unspoken guilt about the sacrifices his career demanded, the endless touring, the long nights, the emotional walls built for survival in the chaotic world of rock and roll. By the time he had the clarity to reflect, time had already slipped through his fingers. The fortune Bob Weir left behind became a mirror reflecting everything unresolved. It forced his family to confront not just financial realities, but emotional truths. Who was Bob Weir to them beyond the legend? What did his wealth say about his priorities? And could money ever make up for time lost? In private moments, family members reportedly struggled with conflicting emotions, gratitude mixed with grief, pride mixed with resentment. These feelings are not unusual, but when attached to a public figure, they become heavier. Every decision, every legal detail felt like it was being watched, judged, and misunderstood. Bob Weir's legacy, however, cannot be reduced to numbers. His true inheritance is cultural. He helped shape an era where music was not just entertainment, but a communal experience. He taught millions to question authority, embrace freedom, and find meaning in the moment. Yet for his family, that same legacy sometimes felt like competition for his time, his attention, his heart. In the end, Bob Weir's fortune didn't make his family cry because of greed or disappointment. It made them cry because money cannot answer emotional questions. It cannot explain absence. It cannot replace conversations never had. It cannot hug you back. What Bob Weir left behind was complex, a blend of brilliance and distance, love and absence, wealth and longing. His story serves as a powerful reminder that even legends are human, and that behind every great fortune lies a family navigating emotions far more valuable than money. As fans continue to celebrate Bob Weir's music, his family continues a quieter journey, learning to live with a legacy that is both beautiful and painful, a fortune that tells the world he succeeded, but also whispers the cost of that success. And maybe that is Bob Weir's final lesson, that freedom, fame, and fortune can inspire millions, but they never come without a price.